And we are recording on Tuesday, December 9th, 2025 at 12:04 p.m. Eastern PM Eastern time with Mr. Will Tanner and Mr. Ian Burlingame. Will's been on here once before. It was with EM, and EM's been on here a zillion times. You guys can go to the description. You can find both their Twitters, all that good stuff. I don't know what the impetus was to reach out to you, Will, but it's I've hit a point. I always forget. I think it's Dunbar, isn't that? It's like the most number of like meaningful
Uh-huh.
people you can remember. And I was always cocky because I think the limit's 150. And at like 500 guests, I was like, I fucking remember all of them. Around 1,000, it went out the window, and I kind of like panicked about that. And then around 1,500, I just started to go based on gut. Literally like a magic eight ball. If a name pops into my head, I go, I'm having him on because I don't have a secretary. I have no idea. So your name popped up in the magic eight ball that is my subconscious, and I was like, I need to have Will back on. And so that's about the extent of my preparation for this episode. But everybody knows EM. For the people that don't know you, Will, could you introduce yourself to everybody?
Yeah, thanks for having me on again. And I feel bad. You messaged me like a month ago, but for those who are using Twitter, it hides like unread messages. So until I clicked around, I didn't see
Twitter
everything
locks
that
my
you wrote.
account every time I send a DM to someone new. So I
Yeah.
don't, it's not you, man. I don't, it's
So
not
whatever
you.
the impetus was, that was that was a
Yeah,
while
just,
ago.
yeah. So yeah,
And
yeah. It just, but that's it. Yeah.
yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm Will Tanner. I primarily write about egalitarianism related subjects. My main focuses are decolonial or post-colonial Africa with a focus on how it changed during the Cold War and what was really going on there, particularly Rhodesia and South Africa, and then also Britain in the British gentry and its Britain's decline into socialism and how that really just destroyed the country. So a bunch of random historical subjects that I find relevant for examining America's current situation through the lens of what happens to other people who went down similar paths.
Yeah. And it's, as someone that I love this podcast, but it's also just like hollowed me out as an individual in terms of like, I just look at things in terms of like numbers now. But I will say, I mean, really this year alone, and you can find it, 3, 4 years ago, it was anything COVID related would always just go through the roof. Oddly enough, the thing that maybe not oddly enough, the episodes that are just going like stratospheric this year are all based on like demographics.
hmm
Everything is based on that, which is, kind of insane, but it's the numbers don't lie. It doesn't matter who the guest is. Like that's the thing people tune into, and that's EM. You were kind of mentioning that more the other day with Luongo. Can you go into that in terms of like, because or not a week ago, sorry, with the Colonel and the General, where I was like, well, if we survive if there's no nuclear war, then I think the term I used is there'd be no thermonuclear bleaching of the planet. And you said like, yeah, but I mean, replacement is essentially bleaching.
It's the same thing.
Yeah.
This is what Rome did. This is how Rome actually maintained and built the empire. Rome never had enough legions to do, control of the empire by force. They force moved populations around and specifically picked populations and dropped them in places where it created nonstop conflict between those two populations. And then they would come in and they would moderate the conflict, right? Which was, keep it to this level and we'll make sure that you're still supported and your leadership's still in place. But this is how Rome controlled the Roman Empire. Well, that Rome's been gone effectively for 1,500 years. Those conflicts are still here. Look at Eastern Europe. That's where they did this the most because that's where most of their threat was at the time. It was not the Germanic tribes till later. It was the northern peoples coming out of the Caucasus and out of northern Persia and those areas. So, what we call Romania, so around the Black Sea, right? The Black Sea area. Well, they're doing the same thing now and they don't need nukes. Effectively, they're using a nuke, but it's a demographic nuke. Why? Because demographics actually still control everything. They determine absolutely everything, everything. And all economics is based off. I know they're trying to move openly. They stated they're trying to move to a return on electricity utilization economy. That's
Hey,
what they're
what?
stating.
Say that again?
What they're trying to do with cryptocurrencies, this AI
Uh,
stuff, et cetera, they're openly stating that the wealth creation of a people is no longer human productivity. It's no longer knowledge, intellectual productivity. It's no longer return on capital. Now it's how much electricity you utilize and how sophisticated are the ways in which, the complicated ways in which you utilize that electricity. It's openly being stated. They're trying to move to that economy. Well, if they move to that economy, they don't need people for whatever their lifestyle is. Now, unfortunately, robotics aren't going to be there for a while to kind of, replace the slaves, et cetera. They know that. The problem is that this return on electricity economy is not thermodynamically, it's not possible according to the laws of physics alone. And the ability to fake it as they've been doing, because for all intents and purposes, the last 25 years, this is the economy we've had. And they're no longer capable of faking that because we're running up against thermodynamic and conservation of energy hard boundaries. So what do? Well, they bleach us, right? They nuclear bleach us by just flooding us with 1/4 of our population roughly now that are people that'll never be, Americans, never be Englishmen, because Americans are still Englishmen down underneath. Whether you're from Scotland, Ireland, Wales, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, South Africa, or even Rhodesia, we're still all
Mhm.
Englishmen down underneath. So, well,
Yeah, one thing I wanted to note there is talking about demographics in Rome. An interesting trend, if you look at Rome from like, I don't know, the time of the Gracchi, essentially through the Julio-Claudian emperors. And th things changed pretty dramatically with the plague of the Antonines in terms of population, just because so
uh,
many people died. But before then, there's this trend in Rome, in the Roman Empire, where the common classes essentially continued having kids reasonably well and continued maintaining themselves. However, the upper classes on which the government relied for leadership potential absolutely did not. They just, whether because they were outmoded by the changes in empire or because of dissipation and decadence, fell off a cliff in terms of population. And the patricians and the equites that had been the officers, the generals, the leaders, it just
judiciary, the
yes,
magistrates, yeah,
like the whole government
yeah.
authority died. They just disappeared. And it wasn't that all of them were killed in war, though a good number fell in the fight between Julius Caesar and Pompey, but not enough to have wiped out the class. It was that they didn't have kids. And so you have the situation where by the time Augustus is ruling, there's really no one on whom he can rely to be a traditional Roman officer. He has a few kids and descendants who kind of fill the role. Germanicus is one example, and Tiberius, before Tiberius kind of went crazy, is another. But it's only a few people and it's very fragile. So then when those couple die in battle or poisoning or whatever happens to the couple kids and descendants of Augustus, the empire didn't have anyone it could really rely on to be traditional Romans. And that was increasingly the case as the years went on. And so by the time of, the Antonine emperors, and particularly after then, the whole equites class that had been the officer corps of Rome and the magistrates of Rome had been replaced by various freedmen, former slaves from around the empire and imports from Germany and particularly Asia, Greece. And they just weren't Roman, and they didn't really have it in them to be Roman. And so the empire had a huge number of problems, and pretty much everything after that point is a story of decline because there was no one to lead Rome into the future as, a Roman entity. It was something else, and it was much more Asiatic, and it just didn't go well. And I think that's something that's important to remember because I, there's this trend towards abdicating our duty to the future amongst the like managerial class sorts in Western countries, the people who, in the past would be middle managers or run corporations, small businesses. A lot of them just aren't, or lawyers, particularly doctors, just aren't having kids. And I think that that is going to be a really dramatic problem as we start facing a shortfall in people who can do things at a leadership level in the tradition of our people as Englishmen, to
Well,
go to what Ian was saying.
we're already seeing it. We're already being replaced by the 3 centuries trained managerial class, British trained managerial class that are the Indians.
Hmm. It's a
And
great
they're
point.
in everything. They're in government, they're in the regulatory bodies, and this isn't being done by accident. This is a reoccupation of America and the English speaking peoples by the British occupier. And it's all being done, while we're rightly paying attention to terrorism, et cetera, all of this managerial class at every level, to include some of the wealthiest and most powerful companies in the world and financial institutions, are all being replaced by British. They're brown-skinned British. They're not English. And it is the very same, we don't have a historic beef with the Indians. So we don't naturally get up in arms about it. And they are pretty good managers. They grew up in the British system. They are purely a British construct. There would be no India if it wasn't for,
Hmm.
the English conquest of the lands there. The British created India, the British East India Company and then the Dutch East India Company after the hostile takeover in 1688. So, one, to your point about Rome, yes, it was a steady decline from there forward. We're seeing that. The fundamental problem we have, though, is something different, and that is that our enemy of the last 340 years is reoccupying us in this passive aggressive way through just bringing good managers in to manage. You need that. Well, where are their loyalties? Their loyalties will never be with us. First off, they're putting them on all these positions. Their loyalties are to the institutions that pay them far better than they would ever earn anywhere else. They're not to the people, they're not to the land, they're not to the just utilization of those assets or resources or legal or other levers of power that they have.
Yeah, and on that point, you get this trend towards like rapaciousness and extraction that you don't when the native people are in charge, which isn't an original point.
Yes,
The Scythian archers
yes,
example is famous, but in Rome, just to go back to that example, kind of after the crisis of the third century, particularly in the last century of the Western Empire, you get this trend where there's these, hugely rich oligarchs who aren't really overly involved in doing anything productive or politically useful or much less glorious. They were just known for these big estates where they wore their silk robes and ruled over slaves essentially. And they weren't Roman. It was these
yes.
imported groups. And you really get the same thing with the Indian managerial class. I'm glad you brought that up. Like, you know, why are they laying off tens upon tens of thousands of Americans right before Christmas? In 1920, or even with the Depression, you had American businessmen who, I'm not a huge fan of the Gilded Age oligarchs, but they did have their good qualities. They wouldn't have done that. They tried to hold on to American jobs because they largely felt it was their duty to do so and to care for their people to some extent. You don't get that now when it's Sundar Pichai at Google or
Well,
whoever is in charge of
they're not
Microsoft.
just laying them off, they're completely replacing them with Indians.
Exactly. Because they feel no sense of compunction
There's
regarding
no
it. There's no
loyalty.
shame, no loyalty. It's
And
just an
the
extraction
re-
game.
the real issue is that they didn't put themselves in those positions. The boards did. Who
Hmm.
controls the boards? State Street, BlackRock, and Vanguard. And oh, by the way, BlackRock is a product of State Street and Vanguard. So really it's State Street and Vanguard, right?
Right.
It's their control of nonprofit, NGO, but nonprofit and for-profit boards that gives them this ability to completely replace Americans. And then that has the influence impact on who gets into governmental positions and bureaucratic positions because of the taxes that they pay, right? 80% of the taxes are paid by the top, what is it, 20%? Well, who is that top 20%? That's the big financialists, right? The big financial folks. So they are doing this on purpose. They are specifically using the arguments, well, he's the best manager, et cetera. Well, Google could be led by an American American.
Hmm.
You want to source somebody to be a good, leader here in the United States, source them from the English speaking, the traditional English speaking peoples. You can go to Australia, New Zealand, even Canada, United Kingdom and find somebody if you can't find the American is just right for that job. And don't give me this BS that they're, they work their way up through the company and they're come on, right? This is all
When
being done on purpose. We are being intentionally reoccupied. We're fighting all these fights and good fights and all that stuff. Meanwhile, passive aggressively, sotto voce, right? We're being reoccupied by the very same people that we're doing all these other things to kick out after 340 years.
in the other problems play into that one. Like, if you look at DEI programs, they have quotas they need to fill. And so, of course, part of that is internship classes, which are
Yeah,
famously
yeah,
composed of like black women, so they can check boxes.
yeah,
But they can't do that for analysts and above at these financial institutions or the related companies because,
correct.
everything will go to hell, and you don't want
Yeah,
every company being a Chernobyl, particularly when it's something like semiconductors where there's very little room for making errors because it like needs to be done correctly. It's not the
yeah.
postal
Well, and the
service.
margins are not
Yeah,
very good. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
So
yeah,
they brought in Indians because they qualify as diverse. They can use the H-1B stuff to take advantage of it. It checks the DEI boxes that still mostly exist despite the alleged war on DEI,
yeah, yeah.
and the whole disparate impact thing remains in force. And so that like the related problems that we'll have to deal with and are kind of trying to deal with play into just the replacement of Americans who would rule with the Scythian archers from the subcontinent who are ruling. And it's a almost intractable problem. It's like when you start looking at CEOs of tech companies and related things, it's huge, and I don't think most people recognize how big the like demographic bomb is.
Well, and it's not just the CEOs, it's at every level in those
Yeah, yeah,
companies
yeah.
and every level in the financial institutions, more and more in the regulatory bodies, more and more in governments at every level as well. They're bringing in people and they're the only ones getting the loans that create the company, the small little personal businesses that lead to the middle class.
Yes. And there's the extraction thing plays into not just firing people who would be in the middle class, but like outright just horrible behavior. Like I don't know if y'all know Paulos on Twitter. His handle is
No,
MythPilot. He wrote
no.
a really good article on Medusa and the Indo-Europeans a while ago, which is how I found him. But anyway, he was sharing a story from, hanging out with like the tech and tech adjacent crowd in California. This total lack of any sense of duty or paternalism, where whatever situation he was in. He was having dinner with an Asian woman who worked at a private equity fund that was buying up trailer parks. And then she was giggling about how, because the people there don't really have any other options about where to live, they can just extort them and raise the prices to whatever their AI models or, however they do that, determine what like the precise dollar amount it can be raised to. And she was giggling about how it was like a host or not a hostel, but a captive group that had no other options, and she just thought it was funny that they could extort them the way they were. And that's just something like, if there were a medieval manuscript that existed about King John doing that, everyone, he'd be the worst king on earth. Everyone would hate him for forever. And that's why largely they didn't act like that, because there was some sense of responsibility, even amongst the bad ones, rather than just outright lemon squeezing. Whereas now you don't have that. It's just squeezing the lemon, just extorting people, and it's a very bad situation.
So, Will, this is what actually, Tommy, this is what got Will and I together a year or so ago, back when he was still a single man. Um, the problem that we have is that we don't have barons that can rise against the king at this point. We don't have a strong nobility. We don't have, we have, wealthy family office people and billionaires and centimillionaires, but they don't think about themselves as, nobility. They don't think in terms of the people. They don't care. They think in terms of their portfolios. They're all adherents to the financialist religion, financialism and the overlap of the new emerging Protestant, reformation of that, which is computationalism, and they're making good money off of it. They couldn't give F all about the actual people until they have to. And unfortunately, I suspect very much because down underneath, we are still English, and the English are not like the continental Europeans. The English are not like any of these other peoples around the world. We've been through this every 400 years, and we've gone to blood at home against our own. And we've forced power to, power, illusionary power, we've forced it to see. And so far, every time we've forced a reset and a rebalance of power. Now, how does this happen here? Well, there's an Achilles heel for all of this. This entire artificial world is created is dependent on power, electricity, and it's dependent upon data centers. Those are fixed points, right? You don't even have to fight them head on and armies and this and that. And they're, all the terrorists they flooded the country with and cartels, et cetera. Yeah, we're going to have to deal with that. But you just blow up some of the power production. You blow up the data centers. Their world's done. You blow up a data center that's artificially creating $3 trillion, it represents the production from electricity of $3 trillion of wealth. Well, that's now gone, right? The problem that they have is that they fail to understand that the people, the English speaking peoples, the native English speaking peoples are still here. And we're pretty good at war. And we just spent 25 years, 27 years in a dirty war all over the world. We weren't just in Afghanistan, Iraq, we're in over 125 different countries. We know how to fight this fight and minimize the bloodshed, right? That's one of the things. Yeah, we killed a lot of people in the GWAT. Upper net estimates are about 11 million people, but it could have been a whole hell of a lot more than that, right? That was with an amazing amount of restraint. There's no 3 generations of warfighters still alive today, still capable of fighting, who have such incredible restraint when killing. We also know, we understand the infrastructure extraordinarily well. We understand that they have some very serious, fundamental misapprobations about where their wealth really, what wealth really is. And, they think, well, we're going to be able to buy security, we're going to be able to buy this and that. Not when it's this type of conflict, not when you, the wealthy elite, who are become this total and absolute parasitic class. And this isn't just the Indians that have come in here, right? It's pretty much writ large,
Hmm.
right? It's like, okay, I don't, there's two things that happen, either one of two paths. One of three paths. One, it just all goes and it collapses, and this civil war that Europe's launching upon us, et cetera, brings us down and breaks the United States up. That's one very real path. That's what they're all in on, right? That's what the old British system is all in on, the Praetorians. The other path is some few of these truly wealthy individuals who get it, evolve themselves into some form of new nobility, as you and I have talked about several times, and understand what the new manorial estate looks like, which is what I write on. And it's really been my path for the last 25 years. Or it goes to blood and a new nobility emerges in the way the old nobility emerged, in destroying things and then making things work and killing anybody that needs to be killed. You know, I don't care who you are.
I think one other thing that's important to consider is there's very little like wiggle room in America. There's this debate over whether Brazil or South Africa is the better comparison point for America. But because on
Mhm.
one hand, our percentage wise, we're much more like Brazil. It's just indisputable. But I think there's this important difference, which is that in Brazil, there's a legacy of what some would call racism and others would just call sanity, where there are regions of Brazil that have laws that favor holders of capital and really like the legacy European population, where it can be relatively safe, not have to worry about crime, and the law enforcement authorities are broadly on its side in keeping things that way. It's not the whole country. You don't want to be like hanging around the favela or anything of that sort at all. But there are regions where you can be relatively secure in life and limb. South Africa, that doesn't exist. Anything that would protect that at the state level, the county level, the personal level has been entirely wiped away, where you can try and put up electrified barbed wire around your house and have the 12-inch thick iron door on the front and maybe defend yourself with a gun. There's all that you still can kind of do, but the law is incredibly hostile to you. There's no laws that restrain the criminals. There are many laws that restrain you, and there's no region that is still built around the idea that you ought be secure in your person. They say there's the Western Cape, which does have better leadership because of demographics, but it's under the same race communist assault as the rest of the country and is just going the way of Durban and Johannesburg, somewhat slower. I think that's important to remember because we have the same thing in America. Like, yes, you're theoretically safer in Tennessee and parts of Mississippi, but it's always up in the air. If you're in Memphis, that's just not true. You can live in the woods somewhere in Tennessee and hopefully no one comes for you. But as we saw with the whole squatter thing, most laws in America favor the criminals because the Civil Rights Act and the related acts regarding disparate impact, policing, all the rest, state level governance even, make it nearly impossible to have the law on your side as someone who is uh, not a formerly undervalued American. And I think that's really important because it means we're much more like South Africa, where there's not the wiggle room of Brazil, where you can be secure, kind of, and not really have to care about it. You always have to be on your guard. It's always a threat, and there's never a situation in which you can feel that your personal well-being and safety is aligned with the state. And so I think as that trend continues to reveal itself because of crime rates and narco tyranny and just all the rest, like the stabbings in Charlotte are a great example, the holders of capital will have to remember that because there's not a place they can retreat to. It will always just be the same thing.
But
Yeah.
but will, they, and I know I speak with them, they think they're just going to get on their jet and leave.
To where? New Zealand, right? Like, is
Yeah,
that?
well, somewhere else, I know one very wealthy man. He's got 25 different estates around the world, and he's got a six-man Navy SEAL team. He's good,
Until that
really.
team decides those estates are its.
Well,
Yeah.
or until such time as somebody takes the kids of one of them hostage and says you
Yeah.
got to off that guy, or not off that guy, but you need to get that guy to sign these papers, which hands over, some major portion of his wealth, or has. So folks have really not thought this through. The problem that we have is that everybody's in a Cold War mentality where the threat is nuclear war, and you just get to your bunker and you survive till it's over. That's not where we are. That's not even remotely where we are. I'm fundamentally agree with you. Where we
Mhm.
are is we're South Africa, one step away from Rhodesia.
Yeah. Or, Dark Ages Britain before the Anglo-Saxon kings is another example that what's his name? Homeric or something. I always
Mm.
mix up the handles and the names themselves, but he mentions this repeatedly. If you look at what happened to the Roman remnants, essentially, whether Britons or Romans, in the Dark Ages before, Alfred and the Anglo-Saxon kings we think
Uh,
of, everyone had to start fighting. No matter which of the ethnic groups you were, whether the imports like the Angles, the Jutes, and the Saxons, or the native Welsh, or the native Britons, or the native Romans, you had to choose a side and fight it out because there weren't safe places in the country. You couldn't just retire to your villa as the Romans had done, which it's a important difference. And I'm reminded of the former Duke of Westminster, the one who died a couple years ago, Gerald Grosvenor. One point that Robert Lacey makes in a pretty like so-so history of the family and other thousand-year families in Europe is that Gerald Grosvenor really committed himself to being like an aristocrat of old in terms of community level involvement. And so this was a time when the Lord's Lieutenant in Britain still controlled the county level militias if they were willing to, do their duty in that regard. They still had the large estates that hadn't quite been taxed away in the 80s to the same extent they have been now, because there's just been multiple more generations of that. And so he used the family's landed wealth and the tenants on it as a basis of some political power that others didn't have. Like he was known for going to all the county militia things and actually leading as I think a colonel. He also hosted like hundreds of events per year on his estate with the various farmers and farmers associations and horticulture, animal breeding, all that stuff. And so he was a powerful person with actual ties of loyalty in a way that others weren't. And if you look at it, the British government didn't quite come for the Grosvenor estate in the same way it came for other estates. They held on to it a lot better. And it's just because he actually did what he should have done. And had the others done that, they would have had a much larger basis of
correct,
power on which to rely.
correct. They would have been the basis of power,
Right.
right? So, this is what concerns me most. And Will and I, as you know, we've been talking this for a year plus now, but um, I am just not seeing a noble class emerge.
Hmm.
I'm just not. Now I see a nascent noble class in some few of the GWAT boys,
Hmm.
right? Some few, not many of them, but there are some GWAT boys who understand all seven elements of power. They know how to lead a manorial estate because that's what that is, right? And it's people. So
Yeah.
Do we, Tommy, you and I and Tom and Alex talked this the other day. Our enemies, the British, Praetorian, Venetian, Dutch, whatever regime, right? They they know that the only way for us to get ourselves out of this is doing all the things we have to do to restore constitutionality and the rule of law and root out funding lines and all the stuff that are happening. But they know ultimately what us warfighters know is that this goes to blood or it's all over and it goes to blood anyways, but it's just this long drawn out, Soviet Maoist kind of blood, right? Um, they're already committed to substantive depopulation. They don't care whether it's white or brown. They want both. And what they are looking at actuarially, because these are managerial class people, is 20 to 25 million dead in the United States. If that's what it's going to take to either for them to take control, so they'll kill 20, 25 million people, or on our side to retain our lands and our countries and our ways of life and our history and our culture and our civilization, that we're going to have to, here in the United States, kill between 20 and 25 million people ourselves. They know that. That's how they think. That's what they've been doing all over the world for centuries. In the United Kingdom, it's something like 4 to 7 million. In Ireland, it's about a million. Australia, New Zealand, so all across the English speaking world, to include South Africa, it's about 31 million is what they expect to kill to attain power and lock it in, or that we're going to have to kill to prevent them. This is the kind of thinking that nobility used to do, realizing that this is the kind of enemy that we're up against, the kind of mind that we're up against. Right? This isn't something you're going to deal with laws and social movements and all this other stuff. No, at some point, your enemy is fully in on eradicating you and locking in their power and control. And the only recourse is to kill them or be killed by them. And anybody who thinks that, well, if we just surrender, if we just give up, they'll burn themselves out. No, 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 no. We don't have to go to ancient history. Just go back to the last century. Look at Cambodia. Look at look at Vietnam. Look at after the well, even during the war, but after the war. Look at Russia. Look at China. Right? Look at other places. Look at parts of Africa. Right? They're going to kill that many of us if we let them. We're going to have to kill that many of them to stop them. Now, here's the good thing. On our side, we don't necessarily need to kill that many of them to stop them. Right? But they're fully committed to that. They're talking about what? 7/8 world population decimation openly,
Yeah,
even
gigacide.
today. What's that?
I think the term is gigacide.
Yeah, gigacide. We need to take them seriously. And if it takes 31 million that we kill to stop that, to save billions, I don't know. Yes, we got to save ourselves. But if we kill 30 million people, 35 million people to prevent the death of 7 billion, isn't that kind of worth it?
It kind of seems like, and I have absolutely no experience or wisdom or knowledge about warfare nor money, but I'll speak on both, like I do. Is it almost kind of seems like a form of like Repo Man kind of thing, where it's like, all right, the mob or whatever, they loaned you the money. Why the fuck did you loan them that money? But there is a moment where it's like, we're getting what we can. We wanted to get the full amount back. We've been giving you extensions. Eventually, they are, and let's say you don't have a family, they're gonna, even though it's a fraction of what they wanted, they're gonna come take your car. They're gonna come take everything you own. They're gonna torture you until you find a way to get more money. And then if they can't do that, they will find your family and kill them as a message to other people.
As a
But
message.
there is a point where it's almost like, it's almost like when the professor would be like, listen, you already failed the test, but if you do this, I'll make it so you have a 60 instead of a 50. And it sucks, but ultimately you're like, it is 10% increase. And if you're worried about the long-term grade of the weighted after the semester, it's a really shitty sort of it's the stages of grief, acceptance, and then going something, you got to get something. out of it, even though it's only a fraction of what you wanted. You got to get something out of it. And I feel like that's kind of what it is
Well,
there's
that's on their side, right? But we
well,
have
then what
to,
I'm getting at is
yeah,
the idea that like X number of people will, or perhaps a more
I got you.
simplified
I got you.
analogy is the plane's hijacked. It's heading towards, Washington, D.C. You got to shoot it down. Well, you're going to kill everyone on board. Yeah, but if you don't kill everyone on board, then it's going to hit the White House and it's going to kill everyone on board and it's going to kill more people.
And then a war is going to launch,
It's a
and
very
yeah,
shitty
yeah,
problem. You got to shoot it out of the sky. Sucks.
yeah,
Women and children, totally get
yeah,
it. Sucks, sucks, sucks. But there is a moment of like, there is no, well, let's pretend there's a third option. It's not, it's happening in real time. The plane's
yes,
hijacked. It's kind of that thing. That's what it feels
yeah.
like.
Very good, Tommy. That latter one is absolutely it. I'm sure the first one was too, but that's too smart for me.
No,
Uh,
I had no
the
idea where I was
plain
going at.
one,
I was trying to fucking like,
plain one is
I wasn't sure if
solid.
I wasn't sure if I was just talking about the plot of Uncut Gems halfway through it. I was like, that's all I was thinking of. I was like, shut the fuck up. If all
Uh,
else fails, go to Dick Cheney. Dick Cheney, shoot the
yeah, Dick Cheney,
yeah, shoot the plane
shoot
down.
your friend in the face on a hunting
Yeah,
trip.
yeah,
Yeah, may he rest in hell.
yeah.
Give me 1 second. Um, this is the problem that we have right now. And again, Will, this goes back to, our conversation and then our messaging, because we message a lot more.
Mhm.
But the problem is that this is the mind that a noble kept. This is what made them nobles. This is what they understood, right? They understood that life and death really is the only actual currency. And at some point, that currency is going to be called in, right? The markers, as you're saying, Tommy, that marker is going to get called in. And yeah, you're not going to get the full measure, right? You're not going to get the full measure. Why? Because it's going to cost you a bit to take what you can, to stabilize what you can stabilize, to prevent from being stolen what you can prevent from being stolen. It's going to cost lives, ours and theirs and ours. That's where we are. Our enemy knows this. How many people have, again, the upper estimates are, somewhere between 4 and 11 million. I think the estimates are actually low, even on the high end. I think we probably killed somewhere closer to 20, 25 million in the GWAT, about a million a year, right? Well, we were doing that in other countries on their, manipulations. How many were killed in the last century by their own governments?
130, I
Third of
think.
a billion,
Yeah.
third of a billion, maybe all told.
I just sorry. I cited purely communism as 130.
No, just look worldwide, right?
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
about a
yeah.
third of a billion people, right? All right, well, who was driving that? Who was guiding that? So what are we, stupid to think that they won't do that here? I mean, we're the prize and they're losing us. And Tommy, to your point, right? They're losing us. So what would they do? Well, this is how they think. They think in numbers of dead. What does it take for us to kill them back in line? And can we do it? Do we have the martial power? Do we have the manpower? Do we have the auxiliaries and the underground and the guerrillas and all these other forces, the paramilitary forces, et cetera, to do it? And have we set the conditions such that we can foster this, initiate this in that populace? This is how nobility used to think. They weren't just princes sitting up in their freaking castle luxuriating off of life. They were constantly figuring out what's going on. How do I keep that from happening? Somebody start some shit here in this community, to the Grosvenor example. Why did he bring them onto the estate? To reconnect with them, to let
Hmm.
them know that we are all one people. We are all one here together, and to hear their grievances and then try to figure out is there some resources or hey, maybe there's a bad apple and we need to deal with that person or somebody's from somewhere else is trying to influence something here, like government, et cetera. And we need to get in there and talk to those people, our people. Why? Because the prince didn't want to go to blood,
Mhm.
because it was his people who died.
One good example on that that's often forgotten is Franco in Spain, where if you look at his accomplishment after the war, it really is astounding how well he did, particularly given Spain's reputation as a basket case since like
Yeah,
1600. But, whether it was looking at fertility rate, which improved dramatically, like real GDP in terms of prosperity increases
yeah,
for the
yeah,
average
yeah, yeah,
Spaniard increased dramatically.
yeah.
and particularly like landed society in Spain, where the aristocracy and the commoners were doing quite well in terms of like being able to earn a living, lead prosperous and fulfilling lives. Like Franco did manage that, and despite the reputation of the right as being like bloodthirsty warmongers, Franco really wasn't. There were a few thousand people he had executed because they'd just been atrocious during the war in the worst sense of the term. Like if you look at the mass graves of
Yeah, yeah,
nuns and
yeah.
people like that,
Oh
like
yeah.
he had to get rid of those people because they're murderers. But he didn't just exact this campaign of blood-soaked revenge like the left pretends the right does. He was very targeted. I think did a good job of being just and noble in some of the higher senses of the term, and it was hugely beneficial for Spain. It was just culling the enemy and saying, no, we're not going to tolerate doing that anymore. You're not allowed to destroy our country. And it worked quite well. So, like Franco, Salazar in Portugal is another good example. Similarly, Lee Kuan Yew in Singapore. People forget because Singapore is nice now, but it almost had a communist revolution. And,
Yeah. Yeah.
Lee just said,
British
yeah,
British led, by the way.
exactly. And they were funding it. They'd been
Yeah.
funding it the whole time.
Yeah,
And he
yeah,
just
yeah.
said, we're not doing this. You're
Yeah.
banned. Bad things will happen to you if you continue advocating subversion.
Yeah.
He locked up a few of them, and the problem went away. Similarly to Wyatt doesn't have a drug problem. He hangs a couple, or the government, he's dead now, but hangs a couple dozen drug smugglers a year, and the problem is non-existent as a result. So, this targeted application of force and power towards the greater common good in the way you're describing, where it's, viewing an estate as an estate and also the country as an estate to be
Yes.
built up and invested in and protected, I think is a view we need to return to, and also one that is very much not what the left and some delusional people on the right frame it as. It is more limited in the application of force. It's just
You can't
like, yeah, we can do these things. Anyway.
you can't guide a people. You can't, yeah. The only structure of government, of governance, I don't want to say government, the only structure of governance that has no restraint on violence is self-rule, right? Monarchy or a nobility and aristocratic rule has unbelievable restraints on the use of violence, both internally and externally. People need to take a step back and really look at how many people in self-rule governments who've done atrocious things have ever been assassinated or killed, compared to how many lords and kings have been assassinated and killed. Most people don't realize that most noble families, very few of them handed off that title to the next generation peacefully. Many of them didn't survive. Why? Because they were locked in this all-out accountable conflict. Well, then we move, we get convinced no princes. And what happens? We remove the accountability at the top. And now the top can do whatever it wants. And, in the Westphalian model and the English equivalent, the Inglorious Revolution, instantiated one fundamental power to states, the use of violence, the legal use of violence, and anybody else within that state did not any longer have the legal use of violence. So what do you wind up with? Well, you want to wind up and the control of the exchequer, right? So the money
Hmm.
supply. So what do you wind up with? You wind up with unaccountable governments who just kill and murder and have and take and steal and they have no accountable, capable, princes who can, like the barons in the 1200s against John, like the nobles in the English Civil War, like some of the nobles and peoples in, the Inglorious Revolution, who can stand up to, governmental power, Leviathan, and say, yeah, no, and we'll fight you for it. Not in this passive aggressive lawfare. No, 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 no. I'll meet you on the field of battle. Win or lose, we're going to meet you on the field of battle because it is that important. So what do you wind up with? Inevitably, you wind up with tyrannies. It's inevitable. This is why Julius Caesar took power. He took it
Hmm.
at the invitation of nobles, senators, magistrates, um, old elite families, and many of the people. He didn't just go and seize it. Never would have happened. He had two legions, right? So this is the and this is, Augustus did this extraordinarily well. I'm a big fan of Augustus Caesar.
Yeah, me too.
Um, Another figure who did this extraordinarily well, two other figures, although one of them I'm not a fan of just because I'm Scandinavian original descent, Norse Germanic peoples. Constantine did this extraordinarily well. It's why Byzantium went on for another 1,000 years, despite everything that was thrown after them. And the other one who did it extraordinarily well on the continent was Charlemagne. Charlemagne did this extraordinarily well as well. Also what Charlemagne did is he had his paladins, the 12 paladins, and Charlemagne never over centralized power. He realized that um, his ability to build and hold the Holy Roman Empire was dependent upon very capable nobility, and not that he was dictating from the top. There's obligations and commitments and, et cetera, but, you need to adhere to your people, and you need to ensure that your people are constantly prepared to defend themselves from all these kinds of internal and external threats. We haven't seen that in a very long time. I think King Charles was trying, the first was trying to do it. When you read his actual statements, not what we've been told by the parliamentarian-led education system, et cetera, Cromwell came along later and did exactly what King Charles had said, exactly what he had said, for the exact reasons. So maybe the American Revolution was the last time we've seen, right, that kind of nobility demonstrate itself. And the founding fathers who, when
Hmm.
they signed the Declaration of Independence, what were they doing? They were pledging to one another that they would give up life and fortune to ensure that these freedoms, this nobility sustained. And half of them didn't they? I think half of them lost their fortunes, third of them,
Hmm.
quarter of them lost their lives, others lost their families, So
Yeah, it's I've been reading more about the founding fathers recently. Like Gordon Wood has a couple of good books on
yeah, I'm
what
not
set them
familiar.
apart, just in terms of being very different. And it is interesting how they seem cut from a different cloth than like Robert E. Lee is really only like the latter day American, and
Uh,
his fellow officers in Northern Virginia kind of they're also somewhat different and much more like the founders. But other than like that small group, they're just different from most modern Americans and even Americans of their day. And the way they really tried to represent classical ideals and be something more. And it's just, I don't really have much else to add. It's just fascinating. And they were like the responsibility, taking direction, taking charge, like actually putting themselves on the line as they did something. It's so different from anything now. Like I was talking about this recently in the context of World War I, where a fifth of old Etonians died in the war. Like, if the Great War happened today, do you think a fifth of Harvard graduates would perish in the trenches, or would they all have heel spurs and asthma? Yeah, obviously the latter. It's what they did during Vietnam, which was the first big war of this managerial regime, and they
yeah,
all got out of it while sending others to die. And it's just yeah, I think one thing that made the founders able to do what they did, and this is something I've been talking about with friends recently, is they focused on independence, not in the sense of being isolated individuals, but in the sense of not having to rely on these much larger systems out of their control for their wealth and power. And so, in cultivating their estates and their empires, like if you look at the Virginia gentry, the mix of commercial enterprise with the plantation system and like local stores and that sort of thing, gave them an ability to resist tyranny in the way you don't get now. To go back, to what you were talking about earlier with people not picking up the mantle, a lot of them are reliant on these, of our present wealthy people are reliant on these larger multinational
yeah,
systems that have a great degree of technocratic control involved and government oversight involved
yes.
in a way that their, material predecessors weren't. And that means they're utterly unable, so long as they keep that state of things intact, to resist anything because they're not independent. And that's why the founders were focused on being independent and of course, living up to that, which is why they read Plutarch and tried to act like classical heroes. But they were different, and that's one of the big ways in which they were different, and how they were able to act that out.
Yeah, so well, very, very well stated. That all comes out of the penultimate expression of Enlightenment, which was the Scottish Enlightenment of the 16, 1700s. They were all direct descendants and adherents of that. And what was that? That was an attempt to be noble as individual peoples without the need for an aristocracy. But in order for that to be possible, in order for people, and I have a Call to the New Nobility video that I did with a actor friend of mine a long time ago, some years ago. But the founding fathers created a system where they thought that the individual man could, on his own, be an aristocrat, could be noble, and not in the terms of power and control, but in terms of the responsibility, right?
Hmm.
That responsible individual sovereignty. Well, unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. What we've seen now for 250 some odd years is that most people can't. They need the nobility. They need the aristocracy. And if they don't have it, what do? They hand it off to some actor, some entertainer, some local politician, or somebody who's totally unaccountable, has absolutely fuck all idea what the hell they're talking about most anything at all, much less everything. And quite generally, first off, doesn't know the person and couldn't care less about them, right? This whole attempt to allow each individual human being to be a noble person, to be nobility, has utterly failed, exactly as it has throughout history, where everybody's totally and absolutely enslaved to an unaccountable oligarchic regime.
Hmm.
Always cheerful episodes. I just sit
Merry
here, I'm like,
Christmas.
yeah, it always happens. So I just sit here, I'm like, how the fuck did I get here? It starts in one way, and it always ends with like the inevitable genocide. It really doesn't matter what the topic is either. Maybe that's on me. I don't know.
No, it's
Uh,
just
uh,
it's the time. It's the
yeah.
time
Yeah.
we're in. Yeah.
I think various like trends are reaching their inevitable conclusions, whether it's with
Yes.
demographics or,
Yeah.
demographics both in the sense of, who's aging out and who's reproducing and who has been imported. The financialist system is kind of reaching the point where the
Yeah.
exponential nature of it is becoming ludicrous. And it's also just all the ties that used to bind have been severed, and that's been a disaster. And now we're seeing it. Like, why is iPhone-based sports gambling so big? It's just a sign of a degeneration of the times and people, because that's the sort of thing that used to be prevented because most people can't handle sports betting in that circumstance.
I
You
might
can go to the
say
horse tracks, but you can't have it in your pocket. Anyway.
so. I might say this, Will. I think that much of what we see as degeneracy is because people are not engaged in their community level. They're not engaged with their local nobility and being of value to their community. They just got too much damn time on their hands. Being
Yeah.
fully engaged with the community, being a fully enfranchised, individually responsible, individual, sovereign person, it takes a lot of time and energy and effort, and it's really complicated. It's really difficult, and it's a lot of relationship management, and that's hard stuff, especially for all the borderline autists that we got around, right? And so
Yeah.
I think, and hey, give me one, you know, give me 1 second, guys. There we go. I have soap in the cat's water that I'm cleaning it, and the cat's about to go drink that, and then I'm gonna have to go clean up after the cat, if you all catch my meaning, right? Um, I think a lot of this is a lot of people are going to, this is something that I'm trying to work on with my partner, Dominic Bruno now. And Tommy, thank you for putting that together. He's an extraordinary fellow. Um, what we're trying to figure out how to do, like the book I wrote, A Modern Knight's Guidebook, is how do you give young men, particularly, how do you fill up their time productively with things that help embed them in their community as something of value that goes beyond how much money they make or what job they have, et cetera. They're broadly knowledgeable and understanding of the dynamics in their community and all these, 7 elements of power way. I've found that the few people that I've been able to, connect with that way, they put the phone down. They stop playing the games. They stop, right? Because then they realize the world around them is the most sophisticated, complex, open world game that they could ever imagine. And the play options, the decision trees are limitless, right? The best MMORPG ever made is
Is
life.
life. Yeah. No, at a thousand
It-
percent is, man.
yeah,
But yeah.
Right?
yeah.
So,
I often kind of view the podcast that way. I mean, a lot of times it's as with anyone doing their own business, it's terrifying because there's no safety net. But other times, if I can get like a more of uh, I don't know, a clear view of it as opposed to from a stance of anxiety, I always do reach the same conclusion. I'm like, oh, this is just the fucking coolest game ever. Like this is the
right?
coolest game ever. I'm
Mhm.
playing it on hard. It's awesome. I don't know what the plot is. There's no spoilers. Like what is actually happening? And yeah, you can choose your character and how to go and blah blah blah. It is if you can look at it from that kind of point of view, it actually does become much more wildly enjoyable and also far more entertaining than the other shit.
Well, as both of you guys do in your different ways, Will, through your reading and your, you know, cogitation on the old ways and patterns, and, Tommy, you through exploring all these thoughts and ideas with people and then thinking through that, which I know you do, even though you tell us you don't. Um,
Always smarter to be to pretend that you're stupid.
right?
Absolutely.
That I
So life is full of Easter eggs
yeah.
and they're extraordinary. And you'll realize, holy cow, somebody dropped a little thing 300 years ago right there in a one statement. There was an Easter egg for all of us if you know how to find it. And then it
Mhm.
like unlocks all this other gameplay, and you're like, holy cow,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? The world's full of that stuff.
Yeah. No, it's like not only is it fun, it's also like if you really if you really kind of harmonize with it, and I try to all the time, it's beyond it's beautiful.
Yes,
Again,
sublime. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah,
fucking listening to some classical like Beethoven that just brings you to tears. Like it moves from it's cool to like all this is happening as you're seeing like the sun set behind mountains and you're like holy shit, and this whole thing is just like
yeah.
and it does, and it's yeah, it can it is incredible, and I think that's almost tactically above all else. I try to do that just as a to keep me grounded from completely freaking out about it.
Well, I got a guy I think you should talk to. His name's Moritz Berlin,
Mhm.
Swiss. He's doing some good stuff for the Natural Law Institute and some other things. He's got a Minuteman program. It's more intellectual stuff.
Mhm.
He's closer to your age. He's another big brain fellow like you, looking at these things. Um, I think a good conversation between the two of you would be in order.
Yeah, that'd be great.
I'll make an introduction here on the X and the messages.
Yeah, that'd be
Uh,
great.
yeah. You and Tommy, you of course, but will you give me hope that nobility is not done, not gone, because you instinctively, naturally resonate with it, and you're reaching back and finding, the Easter eggs and the threads, and you're bringing them forward, and that gives me immense hope for the future generations. Yeah, we're coming to a climax, right? Everything's, the honest truth is this: we can no longer thermodynamically sustain the illusion. It's that simple. According to the laws of physics, we just cannot sustain the illusion anymore. The artificial reality tunnel. Okay, that's unpleasant. What we need to do is we need to try and ensure that they don't put another fake one in place on the other side of this, which is what they're all in on. And they'll kill as many of us as they can, right? To ensure that they own the next 400-year, cycle.
Yeah, fuck them. Um,
There's the
but
attitude.
yeah, but we're coming up on an hour, so
Yeah,
we
yeah,
put a
yeah.
pin in it for now.
Yeah.
But Will, thank you for doing it earlier. EM, thank you for doing it earlier.
Yeah,
Both of
yeah,
you, thank you for coming on.
Yeah,
And
thanks for having me on.
yeah,
yeah.
I'll put it right after this. And yeah, for everybody listening, go in the description. You can find their Twitters, YouTubes, blah blah blah, writings. It's all in there. Um, yeah, gentlemen, thank you both so much.
Appreciate it, guys. You guys
All
have a
right,
good one.
yes, sir.
You
You as
too.
well,
Thanks for
guys.
having me
Thank you
on.
for watching. Hey guys, real quick, you guys know Basil Baz, ARC, the Association for the Recovery of Children. I just did a fundraiser with them the other day, and I'm going to put this on to every episode I do. They are special forces veterans who physically rescue trafficked children. They have since 1993. They have a 100% success rate. They do not take salaries. They all have day jobs, and they literally rescue sex trafficked children. Donations to them are a tax write-off. I get nothing from them, and they have not asked me to put this on. I've included this little clip on episodes for the last year or so, and I'm just re-recording it because I just got to meet him just 2 days ago for future. It's November 25th, 2025, but this will be on every episode now for the next year. And there is nothing better you can do with your money. Um, if you can support them for even $5, please do that. It is, they truly are doing the Lord's work, and I think we all have an obligation to do that. Thank you so much.
Higher ultraviolet exposure is associated with lower mortality. The United Kingdom is a high latitude and low sunlight country. Researchers there collected data on over 360,000 participants in a study of UV exposure via solarium use. When compared with non-users, solarium users had 15% risk lowered of all-cause mortality, 23% lower risk of cardiovascular mortality, 14% lower risk of cancer mortality, and a 12% lower risk of non-cardiovascular, non-cancer mortality. In other words, all other causes. Quoting the researchers, our study adds to the growing evidence that the benefits of UV exposure outweigh the risks in low sunlight environments. A link to the original publication is available in the box below the video. Get some UV light this winter. Immerse yourself in the tranquility of the blue. Visit a blue room soon. www.blueroom.com.
Hey guys, a huge sponsor of the show is Heaven's Harvest Prepper Food. Clayton lives down in Georgia. He's been on the show before. It's actually nearby where I went to college. They are a huge sponsor of the show. They give me some money every month, even when I don't sell enough to warrant that paycheck. Meaning that the show is not free. It's just that it's free for you. If you guys need prepper food, or if you're just interested in supporting the show, I'd please ask you to go to the link in the description. Go to Heaven's Harvest Prepper Food, promo code TPC for 10% off. 72 servings per pail, 25-year shelf life. These things are, they double as dumbbells. Pasta Primavera, cheesy potato soup, mac and cheese, loaded baked potato casserole, chili mac, cheddar broccoli soup, cheesy lasagna, teriyaki rice. You can get banana chips. There's also raspberries, strawberries, and apples. There's a bunch of freeze-dried fruit, or you can even get seeds to plant your own garden. It's not a bad thing to have. It's like gold or ammunition. It's a good thing to have. It's a bad thing if you have to use it, but it's good. It's good to have it, not need it, than need it, not have it. So that's what I'd say. And if you just want to support the show, please go to the link in the description. Please go support them because they support me. Thank you so much, guys.